So we move on to our topic 3, and in our topic 3 we are going through another theory, and this theory is by Lev Vygotsky, a socio-cultural theory. I believe it's a theory you may have gone through or have covered, especially under education psychology, because it's a theory of learning, which again explains more about how learning takes place. According to this theory by Vygotsky, this theory explains how individual mental functioning is related to cultural, institutional, and historical context. And this means that our mental functioning do not happen in a vacuum. It happens in a certain context that can be culture in nature, that is within the community. Institutional, meaning it can be in a school, and a historical context. Wherever one is, we normally have history. There's a family history, a community history, and so on. All that normally have an influence in the way we function mentally. So the theory focuses on the role of social interactions and culturally organized activities. All these normally have an influence on psychological development or cognitive development of individuals. This particular theory describes learning as a process that leads to intelligence in individuals. And social interaction plays a fundamental role in the development of cognition. So this one theory that really emphasizes on social interaction, and one theory that should always come to your mind when you think of learning in a cultural context is this theory by Lev Vygotsky, and that's why it's being referred to as a socio-cultural theory. According to Vygotsky, it says that learning happens at 2 different levels. And the first level he referred to is at interpsychological. Interpsychological level, we can also refer to it as a social level. It is a level at which individuals get to learn through interaction with other people in the society. These other people can be peers, it can be mentors or teachers, it can be members of the community, it can be any human being that the child gets to interact with each other. Because in a real life situation, we normally learn from each other. And according to Vygotsky, this level is very important, interpsychological, because it's through that interaction when people get to share some ideas, and some ideas may be shared which leaves an individual with questions, and one now continues to ask questions. When those questions are answered, learning gets to take place again. And the next level, which he referred to as intrapsychological, and this a kind of learning that is said now to happen at an individual level. when you are on your own. And this happens when one gets now to integrate what they have learned from other people into their own mental structure. So it is a point in which when we say that there is now internalization happening of concepts that have been learned. For example, in our current situation now, as a teacher, I'm interacting with you as a student. At this time when we are interacting, what is happening is what we are referring to as interpsychological. Learning is happening because there is interaction. There's that learning that may happen when I give you work to discuss amongst yourself in groups that you formed. When you're discussing with your peers, what is happening again? There is interpsychological learning because you're learning from peers. But the moment now you go apart, after this particular session, I'll leave you on your own and I leave you with some work to do, maybe regarding the same theory that we have just gone through, for you to be able to respond to questions that are asked. What will happen now is what we are referring to as intra-psychological, where as an individual now you get to reflect deeply about the concepts that we have gone through, about maybe a certain theory. When you seek to internalize the concepts that we have learned, and when that happens, we say now learning is taking place at a level that we are referring to as intra-psychological. And Vygotsky was concerned about the unity and interdependence of learning and development. According to him, learning and development, these are two different things. And according to him, learning leads to development. As a result of learning, where you get to acquire knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values, what results is what we may refer to as cognitive development. You get to move to a higher level in terms of reasoning and even the way you do things, because there is learning that has taken place. But these two processes are related to each other. They depend on each other, because development may not take place if there is no learning. So he says that properly organized learning results into what? Into mental development. And that mental development may not happen if there is no learning. So, and the learning that individuals go through is supposed to awaken internal development processes. And this happens, again, we are saying this learning will happen when a child is interacting in a social environment. And we said interaction can be with different categories of individuals. But there's this interaction where a learner may interact with a person who is more knowledgeable than others. When one is interacting with a person that is more knowledgeable than others, that person is able to nurture the process of growth and development better. And this brings us to another concept by Lev Vygotsky, which he referred to as a zone of proximal development, what is abbreviated as ZPD. According to Vygotsky, this is a zone of exploration in which a student or a learner is cognitively prepared to learn, but for that learning to happen, the individual requires help or social interaction to fully develop. Meaning, there is a certain level you may not be able to reach without some help, without some support from a person within the environment who is more knowledgeable than you are. And that's where now a teacher comes in, or a more experienced peer may also come in order to offer that support, which support he referred to as scaffolding. Scaffolding, this involves supporting a child who is developing, who is learning to acquire more complex skills. Because you know, acquisition of skills happens gradually. And especially with the young children, when they are learning, we normally say that the progression is usually from simple to complex. So they begin with that activity that is simple to do. For example, it might be in any subject, let's say in English, in mathematics. When you're beginning with your learners, you start with the concepts that are easy to master, and gradually you continue moving on to higher concept, which leads to development of complex skills. And that happens through scaffolding. When a child comes to a class and is attending a mathematics class, you may start with like teaching them addition, which you may take as the simplest. From addition, you move on to like multiplication, where you introduce multiplication as a repeated addition. You move on to subtraction. You move on to division. So you move from one level to another, and you move the child, supporting them gradually through the scaffolding. Meaning, as a teacher, as a more experienced caregiver, we ought to have the ability to realize when the child has reached zone of proximal development, that level in which they need support by somebody else to progress. So how do we support intellectual knowledge? How do we support development of skills among learners? There are some strategies that can be employed in supporting young children, what we are referring to as collaborative learning. In collaborative learning, they work together cooperatively, and that now brings out social interaction aspect. They get to interact with each other. Discourse, modeling, scaffolding, these are strategies to be employed. Discourse, let them spend adequate time exploring a concept. Don't rush them over through a concept. Enough time. Modeling appropriate behavior. If it is in doing something, an activity, as a teacher, as an experienced peer, you model appropriate behavior. And then scaffolding, getting to know when do they really need support. Supporting them does not mean that you always do everything for them. They need time first to try things on their own. And then as you're observing, you realize that they have come to a point where if I don't intervene, maybe they'll be frustrated. So at that point now you come in and offer the support that helps them to acquire more complex skills. So these are strategies that should be employed by practitioners in early childhood, by teachers. So we are asking ourselves, what are the implications of this particular theory? What are the implications of this theory to the teacher? It is very important when a teacher has the ability to identify skills that are in the process of developing in a child. For example, as a teacher, you may be able to recognize, or you should be able to recognize, that the reading ability of a child is developing. When you know that the reading ability is developing, you may support that child by offering or by providing them with several reading materials. You'll be capturing their attention and they will read often. You may support them by reading with them together. Because when you identify that ability that is developing, you offer appropriate support. And you offer support that is in line with their interest. Again, you should be able to predict what the learner will be able to do independently in the future. And how do you predict what they can do independently in the future? Is by being able to see the level that they are in, is by being able to identify when they get to zone of proximal development, where you need to scaffold so that in future they can do certain things independently. And for this to happen, we ought to have a teacher who applies dynamic assessment, who is dynamic in the manner in which even assessment is conducted, as opposed to use of traditional and static assessment. Realize traditional static assessment, they fail a lot in assessing the progress of a child, because this kind of assessment do not take care of individual differences. But with the dynamic assessment, you are able to assess child or an individual at their level, depending on the ability that is developing. So I believe this a perspective that has a lot of implication on the instructional process, because this is a theory of learning. And because you said that learning is occurring through interaction, negotiation, and collaboration, meaning that these are processes that should be present in any instructional environment. And therefore, if as a teacher you are informed by this perspective, you set a learning environment that fosters interaction, such that you not be kind of making your learners to study on their own, not to interact, to tell them not to speak, but you create an environment in which they can speak, they can share with each other, they can negotiate, they can collaborate, which is very important. And there will be no dynamism. There will be dynamic practices in manner in which activities are conducted, and also in the manner in which assessment is conducted in a classroom situation. And therefore, the instruction, if you're informed by this perspective as a teacher, you support children or students to engage in activities, to interact with each other, and to use resources that are within them in a manner that will help them to become what they desire to be in their life. You know, to be people that can be useful in the society. And they become useful in the society if they have really been trained appropriately, getting even appropriate models, people to model appropriate behavior, if one wants to become a teacher, how should the teachers conduct themselves? One gets to model appropriate behavior of how a teacher should be. If one wants to become a mathematician, a scientist, they get models of this that they want to become in the instructional process, and definitely they become that. So that's Vygotsky theory of learning, and as we come into conclusion of the lesson, I'd like you to analyze the extent to which educational practices in Kenya are influenced by socio-cultural theory by Vygotsky. Is there much that is happening in our educational system that we can credit to the socio-cultural learning theory? Or are there many things that are happening that are contrary to this theory? I would like you to critically analyze that about our practices in Kenya. So that brings us to the end of our lesson. Thank you for paying attention. Nice time.
These televised lectures supplement our robust online learning going on our MKU online platform. You can view more on our televised lectures via our online platform. We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The following are the steps to follow so as to complete your online application. Download the application form from the website www.mku.ac.ke. Attach copies of your academic certificates and ID. Pay the application fees via M-Pesa pay bill number 270988. Your ID is the account number. 2,000 shillings is the charge for a postgraduate. You can also deposit in the bank accounts provided on the website. Then email all the above to apply@mku.ac.ke.